In the previous content, I covered the story of Rebekah. I personally do not like to use hypotheticals, but let's hypothetically say that the story of Rebekah actually justified the wearing of jewelry and makeup in the sense of fashion according to American culture and the American way of life. We're still going to cover the topic. Is it okay for Bible-believing men and women to wear makeup and jewelry from the perspective of Jacob? Jacob is the predecessor of Abraham and Isaac. The book of Genesis, chapter 35 at verse 1. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. At verse 2, Then Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. At verse 3, And let us arise, and go up to Bethel, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. At verse 4, And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. When we look at verse 2, there is no doubt about who it was that Jacob was talking to when he was dealing with his own household. He was talking about Rebekah and Deborah, Rebekah's nurse. He was not talking to men, and he was not talking about men here. At verse 2, the first key word that we need to pay attention to is strange. The scripture-based definition of the word strange, it means foreign. It means foreigner. It means heathen or heathendom. It means alien. The second key word of this verse is gods. The scripture-based definition of the word gods, it means Elohim, which means gods in the plural. This was used in the plural, especially with the art. Occasionally, this applied by the way of deference to magistrates and superlative angels. In other words, it was associated with devil worship because there is only one God. The third key word of this verse is clean. The scripture-based definition of the word clean, it means to be bright. It means to be pure. It means sound. It means clear. It means purify. It means purge. The final key word of this verse is garments. The scripture-based definition of the word garments are concepts through the idea of a cover assuming the shape of the object beneath it. It means a dress. In other words, tight form-fitting dresses or skirts. At verse 4, the key phrase is the strange gods which were in their hand. And the second key phrase is all their earrings which were in their ears. Jacob preached in verse number 2, and verse number 4 was the response. They had to get rid of all this stuff before Jacob built that altar. So, in this particular verse, we see the scriptures condemning the wearing of earrings in the ears and nose jewels upon the face. So, if we want to use hypotheticals to say it was okay for the wearing of jewelry in Genesis chapter 24, Genesis chapter 35 makes it plain and clear that it was condemned by God's people at this point. To have it in their hands or in their possession and to wear it upon their ears and their face, they had to leave that stuff behind. They certainly were using it for fashion and not a currency, which was the intended purpose to purchase Rebekah, as it was their custom to either buy their wife or work for them in that time. Had Jacob not put the jewelry and tight form-fitting clothing out of his house, he would have not became Israel, and God would not have met with him face to face. Just like what would have happened if Abraham didn't separate from Lot. If women wearing earrings was considered strange gods then, at what point in Scripture was it not considered idolatry? If women wore tight form-fitting dresses, according to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 22 at verse 5, men have clothing that pertains to them. But when dealing with the woman, it's using the same word, garments. There are two different scripture-based definitions of the word garments that deal with women, and only one scripture-based definition of the word garment that deals with men. The definitions for men and women across the board clearly means that the flesh is to be covered. All you have to do is a word study on the word garments and look at the gender it's referring to when it's mentioned. Grab the Hebrew number and go look for yourself. Bible-believing women wear dresses or skirts that are not form-fitting as a part of the holiness standard of dress. Not only that, based on where we are in Scripture, earrings are condemned in this setting of Scripture. When it comes to dealing with God from the perspective of building altars, we do not serve a double-minded God. It doesn't matter what the rest of the world does. When it comes to God's people, he established his covenant with Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob. The precedent that was set with Jacob was to put away the strange gods. Other religions state that the Bible does not condemn the wearing of jewelry. Here is the first set of scriptures condemning earrings. The scripture-based definition of earring, singular, and earrings, plural, still stands, regardless if it's worn in the nose, on the face, or in the earlobes. If you were a woman in that time, you would have had to conform to that standard and leave that stuff behind, just as Rebekah was required to leave it behind. That was set by Jacob. To be considered God's people, Jacob would have had to separate himself from you in order to please God. Don't forget, Rebekah is from the Ur of Chaldees, the same place that God called Abraham out of. God had no intentions of leaving his people in the same lifestyle that they were called out of. Get excited and be on the lookout for the next update.